When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. Have you ever done something that the moment it was over, you knew you'd have to carry it for the rest of your life? Not the kind of mild regret that fades with time, but something that clings to you like dried blood on your hands, no matter how hard you scrub. Sometimes it's just a lie, a signature, a tiny decision you tell yourself, it's fine, everything will work out. And then one day you realize what you traded wasn't a number in your bank account. It was a human being, a life. I still remember that night. Rain streaked the glass of the on-call room, the scent of antiseptic mixed with cold, stale coffee in my cup. On my desk lay a set of test results and an envelope thicker than anything I'd ever held, heavy enough that I could hear my heartbeat change when I touched it. They wanted me to change a few numbers. They said, she won't live long anyway. This way, she can go peacefully. Peacefully, I believed that word. Believed it enough to give myself the right to choose how someone would die. Do you believe there are choices that look like shortcuts, but are really cracks that drop straight into the abyss? I stepped into that crack, and I fell, endlessly. At first, I thought I'd only have to live with guilt inside my mind. But no, guilt has its own way of taking revenge. It turned into dreams I couldn't escape. It built a strange hospital where every bed held another version of me, and all of them were dying the same way as the people whose only chance I had stolen. I'm telling you this not to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm telling you so you'll know one wrong decision can turn your entire life into a sentence with no release. Because this is my story, Matthew, the man who traded a life for money and lost himself forever. The rain that night wasn't falling so much as it was pressing itself against the glass, pooling in long streaks, trying to force its way into the ICU. Each drop clung for a moment before slipping down, leaving behind a trail like tears on a cheek. I watched them without really seeing them, my eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the pain, where the city blurred into shifting halos of light. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs overhead had a strange rhythm to it, a faint flicker that made the corners of the room breathe. It was late, too late for visitors, too late for the chatter of nurses in the hall. Only the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sigh of the ventilation system kept me company. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I still cradled the cup like it could anchor me to something human. On my desk lay two things, Mrs. Green's file and an envelope. One was light enough to lift with two fingers. The other felt heavier than it had any right to. Her results told the truth. Pneumonia, severe but not beyond saving. Antibiotics, oxygen therapy, a week or two of care, and she could have gone home. Not whole, but breathing. Not cured, but alive. The envelope told another story. It didn't speak in medical terms, didn't bother with diagnoses or percentages. It spoke in the language of numbers printed in ink and folded neatly into stacks. It smelled faintly of perfume, a soft floral note that clung to the paper, foreign in the sterile air of the hospital. I can tell you the exact moment I crossed the line. It wasn't when the envelope first appeared in my office that morning. It wasn't even when I noticed it still sitting there after my shift. It was when I let my fingers rest on it, feeling the thickness, the edges pressing into my skin. Something in me shifted then, something I'd thought was immovable. Earlier that day, her daughter had stopped me in the hallway. She was small, fragile even, but her grip on my hands had been firm. "Doctor," she said, her voice breaking just enough to make me look her in the eyes, "please, make her comfortable." She didn't know what she was asking. Or maybe she did, but in a way that was innocent, not calculating. To her, it meant easing the coughing fits, making sure her mother wasn't gasping for air in the dark. But by the time those words filtered through me, they had already changed, already been reshaped into something I could use. I told myself a story right there in the hallway about mercy, about how the truth, you will live, could bring false hope or panic or worse. I told myself that letting her slip away quietly was kindness, that some lies are softer than the truth, but lies aren't soft. They are stones in your pocket when you're treading water. They drag you down slowly without drama until you realize your feet can't touch the bottom anymore. I remember looking at Mrs. Green later that evening. She was asleep, the oxygen mask fogging slightly with each breath. Her chest rose and fell in an uneven rhythm, but it was steady enough. Her skin was pale, but not the gray of someone already halfway gone. I knew what the right treatment could do for her. I also knew that if I withheld it, the pneumonia would tighten its grip, and still I turned away. The act itself was nothing dramatic, just a pen gliding across paper, my signature curling at the end like it always did, a few keystrokes in her electronic chart, numbers shifting, prognosis changing from treatable to terminal. It was quick, almost routine. That's the dangerous thing. Sometimes the worst moments of your life feel exactly like the ordinary ones. When it was done, I sat back in my chair and waited for the weight of what I'd done to land. It didn't. Not then. All I felt was the soft slide of the envelope into my drawer, the click of it closing, and the faint metallic taste in my mouth I couldn't shake. Outside, the rain kept coming, harder now, each drop a knuckle rapping against the window as if the night itself was trying to get my attention. But I stayed where I was, staring at the file on my desk. I told myself I'd done the humane thing. I told myself I could sleep tonight. I didn't know it yet, but that rain was the first knock at my door, the first whisper of a debt that would follow me into every shadow. In the weeks that followed, I'd replay this night over and over, searching for the crack where I could have turned back. Was it when I first saw the envelope? When I heard her daughter's voice? Or was it much earlier, years earlier, when I decided that my career, my reputation, my comfort mattered more than the messy complications of saving a life? The truth is, I don't remember leaving the hospital that night. I must have walked out the same way I always did, keys in one hand, bag slung over my shoulder. But in my mind, it's all just the sound of rain, the hum of the lights, and that envelope on the desk. People think moments like this come with lightning, with some dramatic signal that the world has shifted. Mine came with a whisper I chose to answer, and once you answer, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. The next morning, the hospital felt the same, sterile, humming, alive with the low pulse of machines and hurried footsteps. But I wasn't the same. There was a subtle shift in me, like the faint imbalance you feel when one leg of a chair is shorter than the others. You can still sit, but you're always leaning somewhere you shouldn't. The envelope was still in my drawer. I knew it before I opened it, the way you know a wound is still bleeding without looking. It wasn't as if I hadn't handled money before. Bonuses, stipends, speaking fees, they all came with this job if you played your cards right. But this was different. This wasn't earned. This was bought. And the thing it purchased was irreversible. I took it out and set it on the desk. The paper had the faint give of having been handled recently, the folds worn soft. When I slid the bills out, the air shifted. I don't know if it was the scent of perfume still clinging to them or the weight, but the room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. There's a strange thing that happens when you touch something you know you shouldn't have. Your hands become traitors, moving with both hesitation and hunger. I thumbed through the bills, once, twice, counting without meaning to. The number meant nothing. The act of counting meant everything. Money is loud, even in silence. It speaks in the rustle of paper, the subtle exhale of relief you try not to let anyone hear. It tells you stories about freedom, about escape, about comfort you haven't earned but now can't imagine living without. The truth is, I didn't spend it. Not right away. I didn't even take it home. I put it back in the envelope, slid it into the drawer, and locked it. As if that made it harmless. As if locked guilt is any less toxic than guilt you carry in your hands. Later that day, I passed Mrs. Green's daughter in the hallway again. She smiled at me, a small, grateful smile, the kind people reserve for those they believe are saving someone they love. It hit me harder than the money ever could. There's a cruelty in kindness when it's built on a lie. Every thank you, every warm look became a needle, pushing deeper into a place I didn't know could hurt. That night in my apartment, I found myself staring at my reflection. The mirror didn't accuse me, it simply reflected me back at myself. That's the worst part. It's not that the world changes its face toward you. It's that you have to keep looking at the same one knowing what you've done. I told myself I could still fix it. That tomorrow I could walk into the board's office, admit the change, reverse the chart, start the right treatment. But the truth? I didn't want to. Why? Because the moment you take the money, you start building a wall of reasons not to give it back. You tell yourself it's too late, that it would cause chaos, that it would break the family's trust. But beneath all those noble-sounding lies is the real reason. You don't want to face the fallout. So I went to bed with the envelope still in my drawer at work. I told myself I'd deal with it later. But later, as I'd learned, is just another word for never. The rain had stopped that night, replaced by a heavy, unmoving air. I left the window open, hoping for a breeze, but all I got was the faint hum of the street below. Lying there in the dark, I realized I could still hear the rustle of those bills. Not in the air, not in my ears, inside me. And when I finally drifted into sleep, it followed me. Not the sound, but the weight. The same heaviness I'd felt when I first touched the envelope. Only now it wasn't in my hands. It was on my chest, pressing me down. I woke up gasping. My room was empty. My heart was not. It's strange. Looking back, the envelope wasn't just paper and money. It was a seed. And by taking it, I had planted something in myself I couldn't control. Something that would grow in the dark, pushing its roots into every corner of me until I wouldn't remember what it felt like to be clean. And that, I think, is the most dangerous part. You never know you're rotting until the smell reaches someone else. Mrs. Green died 3 weeks later. It happened at 3:14 a.m. in a room where the clock seemed to tick just a little louder than in the rest of the hospital. I wasn't on duty that night, but I was there, charting for another patient, lingering in the quiet hours that always felt too heavy to bear alone. I heard it before I saw it. Not the flat line, that came later. It was the wet, desperate sound of a chest fighting for air, the kind of ragged inhale that makes you lean forward, as if willing your own lungs to help. The sound drew me to her doorway like a hook buried deep under my ribs. She was small under the blanket, smaller than I remembered. Her hands clutched at the fabric, twisting it as though she could wring the sickness out of her own body. Her face was tight, every muscle straining with the effort of breathing. And yet, she was still alive, still there, still reachable. I stood in the doorway, and for a moment I almost moved, almost called for help, almost stepped forward to do the very thing I'd taken an oath to do, but almost is a graveyard of intentions. And that night I buried another one there. Her daughter wasn't there. She'd gone home hours earlier after sitting through another long day of small talk and reassurances. She believed me when I told her there was nothing more we could do. She trusted me. Trust. Such a short word for something so enormous and so fragile. When the monitor screamed, it wasn't sudden. Her breaths had been growing shorter, her pauses longer. The numbers on the screen dipped, hesitated, then began to tumble. I could feel my own heartbeat trying to keep pace with hers, falling into an irregular syncopation. Nurses rushed in. There was movement, hands, voices, but it was all noise. Background to the one thing that filled the room. Her eyes. They opened in those final seconds, and they found me. Not the nurses, not the ceiling, me. And in that gaze, there was something that made my throat close, recognition. Not of who I was in name or role, but of what I'd done. As if in those last gasps, she could see the ink on the page I'd signed. When her chest stilled, the silence that followed felt wrong. Not like peace, but like the absence of something that should still be there. A note cut short in the middle of a song. They covered her face, and I found myself staring at the curve of the blanket where her head had been, memorizing it without meaning to. It's strange what the mind clings to. Not the drama of the moment, not the sound of the machine shutting down, but the shape of absence. I told myself, this is what happens. People die. I had seen it 100 times. But this one felt different. Not because she was my patient, not even because I had taken away her chance, but because I knew, without her ever saying it, that she had known. I left the room before anyone could look too closely at me. The hallway felt colder than it had before. The fluorescent lights hummed louder. The floor squeaked under my shoes like it was trying to draw attention to every step. In the stairwell, I sat on the second landing and pressed my hands to my face. I could still feel the weight of the envelope, weeks after I'd locked it away. It hadn't gotten lighter. Neither had I. Some deaths are clean in memory, fading like a photograph left in the sun. Others etch themselves in you. They don't blur, they don't soften. They stay sharp, as if they're waiting for the day you stop pretending they aren't there. That night, I went home and poured a glass of whiskey. I drank it without tasting it. I stared out the window at the same rain that had fallen the night I signed her life away. It felt like the sky was trying to remind me, I was there when you began this, and I'll be here until you end it. I wonder sometimes if I had stepped forward, called for the right medication, tried one more treatment, would she have lived? Or was her time already written? You can't ask the dead for answers, but the living? I'll ask you, if someone took away your only chance, not because it was impossible, but because it was inconvenient, would you forgive them? I already know what my answer would be. Sleep didn't come so much as it ambushed me. I remember lying on the couch with the TV murmuring some late-night rerun, the city a low, distant ocean beyond the glass. I must have closed my eyes between one commercial and the next. No ritual, no prayer. Just the tiredness of a man who'd been keeping pace with his own shadow too long. I closed my eyes and woke somewhere else. Not in bed, not anywhere familiar, but inside a room humming with a ghostly pulse. The ceiling lights flickered too bright, too deliberate. The air tasted of antiseptic in something colder, as if the night itself had exhaled a warning. I tried to sit up. My body betrayed me. My shoulders slumped, pressed by a gravity that wasn't mine. The sheets were scratchy, too tight around my limbs. The mattress gave a low groan under the weight of something other than me. Some corner of my mind recognized the beeping, that steady rhythm, the slow bedunk of a monitor. I reached for it, but my arm felt heavy, foreign, like someone else's regret. There was silence beyond the door, then faint footsteps, distant, then nearing, but never quite arriving. The corridor light slanted under the doorframe, a sliver of motion and nothing more. A wheeled cart passed with gentle urgency. The wheels whispered, a hush that said I wasn't awake. When I tried to speak, my voice split into rasp and echo. All I could manage was her name, Mrs. Green, floating fragile. It felt like the only anchor. A scent rose, a metallic note that wasn't quite blood, more like memory, the kind we bury deep, thinking we've forgotten until a moment like this drags it back, breathless and sharp. I turned my head. Not myself, I was older, thinner, my face lined with years I haven't earned, a nasal cannula taped to my cheeks, a plastic strip that pulled at my wasted skin, each breath a serrated inhale. I tried to think. This is a dream, I told myself. But my heart pounded back. It's not logic that dreams hijack. It's your sense of safety. Lights above me flickered. The monitor's beeping sped up, louder, urgent. My chest seized, each breath a rebellion. Inside me, organs whispered fear. I reached for the call button over the bed. My hand responded in slow tremor, fingertips grazing the cord. It slipped, retreating as if mocking me. I laughed, a hollow sound. Funny how panic and desolation share a voice. If you've ever wanted help, but your body refuses to ask for it, that's what panic feels like. I pressed the button anyway. The small click was an exhale, a plea. The hallway light blinked, and somewhere a distant chime rang, a promise unmade. Then the cough came, not a clearing of throat, but something raw from a lung's defect. It rattled, building in my chest, a desperate thief. Fog gathered on the oxygen mask. Each gasp stole more clarity from the world. Memories flickered, her porch swing bathed in afternoon sun, a half-drunk iced tea, the laugh that wasn't there anymore. Ordinary things, now sacred. I wanted to say sorry. I could have helped you, but apology needs breath, and there was less of it now. Footsteps approached slowly, uncertain as twilight. A nurse's silhouette filled the door. She moved with practiced calm, hands on mask, adjusting flow. Her voice was low. I caught one word: stay. It shouldn't matter, but it did. I stayed. Not out of strength, but inertia. Exhaustion has a grip of its own. Seconds passed, heavy as stones. I counted them against the monitor's bleeps. On the 10th, consciousness wavered. Edges blurred. The monitor alarm sobbed at me. Then something brushed my hand. A warmth. Unclaimed. A quiet presence that didn't judge. It pressed once, feather light, and I believed for a moment I wasn't alone. But when I dared to look, nothing. Just a gray quarter light and a vacant bed. I might call it my conscience if I believed in absolution. Perhaps it was guilt or a ghost or my own body's last plea, but naming it didn't matter. I felt it, and that was enough. Not yet, I whispered. Maybe to it, maybe to myself. The monitor clicked. The nurse breathed, steadying me. The room softened. The dream unraveled. I drifted back into my body. The couch caught me. The TV glowed emptily. The city lay outside, indifferent. I lay frozen, the fog of the dream pulsing in my chest. My throat stung. My lungs burned. I coughed once, ashamed at the ragged sound. Fog bloomed on my exhale. Water from the tap splattered in cold rhythm. I drank and choked, a final rebellion of the body adjusting to its own. In the mirror, two faces overlapped, mine and hers. I asked the glass, "Who is dying in that bed, you or me?" No answer came, only breath that tasted of regret. I dressed, fearing sleep more than the day. On the street, life marched on. Trains, laughter, buses. The world didn't notice the fissure inside me. But inside, a hospital corridor had planted itself behind my ribs. A hand that may have been mine, may have been hers, hovered there, silent, unyielding. Have you ever asked yourself in the middle of the night what not yet means? Is it mercy, or delay, or demand? I stepped into the elevator and watched floors climb. The lobby's air smelled of coffee and paper. Each breath felt borrowed. Each step was both confession and verdict. Behind me, a nightmare waits. I will meet it again. When it comes, I pray I remember whose hand was on mine. The second time it happened, I wasn't dreaming. At least, not in the way sleep usually carries you. There was no fading out, no slow drift into some unconscious fog. I blinked in my kitchen, halfway through pouring coffee, and when I looked up, the mug in my hand had disappeared. So had the sink, so had the walls. In their place was a long corridor, dimly lit, humming with that sterile, flickering fluorescence that belongs to every hospital, and none at all. I was standing barefoot on polished linoleum. The floor was warm, not from heating, warm like skin, like something beneath it was alive. I turned to look behind me. There was no door, no entry point, just hallway, stretching in both directions, disappearing into a horizon I couldn't see. The air buzzed faintly, like old wiring. At first, I thought it was another dream, but dreams blur at the edges. This place was sharp, too sharp. I could smell rubbing alcohol and something sourer, old fear maybe. Then I heard it, the sound of breathing. Not mine. It came from behind one of the doors to my left, the kind of slow, shallow breathing that tells you someone is struggling, on the edge of something. The door wasn't marked, none of them were. Identical beige panels, each with a single metal handle and a rectangular window at eye level. I stepped closer. My hand moved toward the glass, though my gut screamed to walk away. And when I looked in, it was me, lying in a hospital bed, pale, tubes snaking from both arms. A monitor beside the bed beeped in hesitant rhythm. My chest rose and fell like it wasn't sure whether to keep trying. My eyes were closed, but my face, the expression it wore, wasn't peaceful. It was afraid. I stumbled back. My hand slapped against the wall for support, and I expected it to be solid, cold. But it pulsed, just slightly, like touching the belly of a sleeping beast. I turned, heart pounding, and ran down the corridor. The hallway didn't end. It just shifted. Lights flickered above me in a rhythm that felt familiar. Beep, flicker, beep, flicker. A syncopated dance between life support and surveillance. Another door, another window, another version of me. This time I was burned. Skin peeled in sheets, eyes open, fixed. My hand twitched every few seconds. Some cruel echo of a nerve that hadn't yet accepted death. The next door, drowning. The next, seizure. The next, shot in the chest. Each room was a museum exhibit of my own death. I tried screaming, but the walls swallowed the sound. This wasn't a dream. It couldn't be. My senses were too loud. The cold of the metal handle, the glare of the lights, the static on the monitor. And still, no one else, no nurses, no doctors, just me. Me in every bed, me in every ending. Then came the voice, not loud, not even outside of me. It bloomed in the space between my ears, like a whisper dropped directly into my bloodstream. You'll live each death you've given. I spun around. No one. You'll live each death you've given. It repeated without malice, without judgment, as if it were merely fact, like gravity or oxygen. No, I said, or thought, or screamed. No, I didn't kill them. I didn't try. The hallway didn't care. It gave no reply. I walked, slower now. Each door held another horror, and each horror was me. Different clothes, different injuries, but always me. I began to wonder, how many rooms are there? And worse, how many deaths have I given? You tell yourself small lies to sleep at night. You say, it was just one patient. But in this place, that lie is peeled back, room by room. And what you see underneath isn't a mistake. It's a pattern. I stopped counting after the 13th room. I couldn't bear it. Some doors I walked past without looking. Others I peeked into for just a second before my stomach turned. But one door I couldn't ignore. It was slightly ajar. A sliver of yellow light poured out like the eye of a storm. Inside, I found myself, not dying but dead, completely still, eyes open, glassy, a sheet pulled to my chest, and next to the bed, an envelope. The same one, the same soft corners, the same scent. Only this time it was stained, dark at one corner, spreading. I stepped closer, and as I did, the overhead light buzzed louder. The sound thickened until it became unbearable, and just as I reached out to touch the envelope, I woke, but not on my couch, not in my bed, in a hospital bed. My hands were clean, my skin unburned. I wasn't drowning or seizing, just awake, confused. A nurse I didn't recognize leaned over me, checking vitals. She didn't speak, just nodded once and walked out. No clipboard, no monitors, no sound. And then I blinked, and I was back in my apartment, on the floor, hands trembling, breath shallow. The coffee mug I'd been pouring was shattered at my feet. I touched my face. Sweat. My pulse was racing. But the worst part? I could still hear the beeping. Faint. Like it had followed me home. There's a kind of silence that doesn't comfort. It doesn't soothe or give you space to think. It presses. It hums at the edge of your mind like the high-pitched tone after an explosion. Everything intact, but forever changed. That was the silence I woke into. The apartment was dim. The mug had shattered hours ago, but I hadn't moved. My body ached like I'd run a marathon in a storm, not physically, existentially. My nerves felt frayed, my skin too thin. Every inch of me pulsed with the memory of hospital beds and dying lungs. I couldn't remember what time it was or how long I'd been on the floor, but I knew something had shifted. I was no longer the man who believed in dreams. I was the man who had walked into his own death and come back with the smell of antiseptic still clinging to his clothes. I showered in silence. I dressed like someone who expected to be watched. I walked to work with my eyes lowered, not in guilt, but in anticipation. Something was coming, and it did. Not at work, not at home. It came in between, where the world thins. I was on the stairwell between the ICU and the basement, a place no one lingers. The walls were old tile. The lights flickered more than usual. I had taken that shortcut hundreds of times without a second thought, but this time, I felt it, the pressure, like a hand on the back of my neck, and then I saw him. At first, he looked like anyone, tall, coat white as bone, standing at the bottom of the stairs with his hands in his pockets, head slightly tilted, not moving. The lighting was strange, too white, like theater lights. He stood in a spotlight that wasn't coming from anywhere. No ID badge, no stethoscope, just the coat, crisp, pressed, not a wrinkle on it. I froze, my hand clutched the rail so tightly my knuckles went white. He didn't speak, just looked up at me with a face I couldn't quite see. Not blurred, not shadowed, just undecided. Like the dream hadn't finished rendering him. And yet, I knew him. Not his name, not his voice, but what he was. He was the architect of the hallway, the steward of those doors, the curator of every death I'd walked past. I don't know how I knew. Some things bypass understanding and go straight to the blood. Still, I asked, "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing a door that shouldn't be there. It wasn't a hospital door. It looked old, worn wood, a brass handle, the kind of door you'd see in a house that had secrets behind it. I didn't want to move. I should have run, should have called someone, should have screamed, but I moved, down the stairs, past him, to the door. The man didn't follow. He watched. His presence behind me was colder than any touch. I opened the door, and I was back, in the hallway, the one with no end, the one with the rooms, the one where I died. Only this time it was different. The lights were dimmer, the beeping slower, and the doors, some of them were open. Not all, but enough. Enough for me to see that the pattern was no longer mine alone. I walked past the first room and saw myself again. Tubes, needles, eyes wide. But in the next room, the bed was empty, the monitor flatlined, the sheet neatly folded, vacant, finished. And in the next, a new death. One I hadn't lived. Yet. My name was still on the chart. My face still on the body. But the wound was new. A fall downstairs, a broken neck. I stepped back, heart thudding. The hallway had changed its rules. This wasn't a museum anymore. It was a schedule. Behind me, I felt him, the man in the coat. Though I never turned, I knew what his presence meant. The sentence had begun. You'll live each death you've given. That voice again. But now it was quieter. Not a threat, not even a warning, just a clock striking once. I turned, ready to ask something, anything, but the hallway was empty, the door behind me gone. Just me. In a long row of rooms I was slowly running out of time to avoid. I stood still for what felt like hours, then whispered, "What happens when I reach the last one?" No answer. Only the sound of a heart monitor in the distance. And the echo of shoes, mine, waiting to walk into the next room. The hallway was quiet, but not empty. Silence, I've learned, has weight. It leans in. It breathes on the back of your neck. I stood in front of the first open door. The light inside was soft, yellowed, like morning through an old curtain, a peaceful hue meant to lie. The room smelled like something sweet going sour. I stepped in, and just like that, my knees buckled. Not in fear, in pain, sudden, absolute, like a blade slipped between two ribs and twisted upward. My lungs seized, not metaphorically, literally. My chest stopped knowing how to move. I was no longer the man at the threshold. I was the man in the bed. I was 38 in this one. I don't know how I knew. It just lived inside the body I now wore. A life already halfway spent. Divorced, distant father, accountant, heart disease undiagnosed, and now dying on a Wednesday. The pain wasn't sharp. It was pressure. Immense, as if a god had stepped on my chest and refused to lift his heel. I tried to cry out, but my mouth was dry. My tongue sat like sand in my throat. I reached for the call button. Of course I did. We do, but my fingers were slow, clumsy, like they'd forgotten their own sequence. Beep, beep, slower now. I heard someone speak, a nurse maybe, but the words were water and I was drowning. "Mr. Talbot," she said. That was the name, my name here, Talbot. I tried to meet her eyes, but my vision kept flickering, like bad film in an old projector. Every time I blinked, the room twisted, sharper, colder. I tasted metal. Pain. Chest, I think I said. Or maybe I just mouthed it. She called out. Another voice answered. Footsteps. But they all moved too slowly, as if the air itself had thickened. I wanted to scream, run, but I couldn't even whisper. The pressure deepened. I felt something pop inside me. Not audible, but felt, like cartilage surrendering. Then came the heat, not outside, inside, radiating from the center of my sternum outward, like a bloom, a flower made of fire. I knew this pain. I'd seen it in patients. We tell them to breathe. We tell them to hold on. But inside, we know some pain isn't survivable, and I was surviving it anyway. Second by second, that was the curse, to live through what others didn't have to finish. I was crying now, or maybe sweating. The difference didn't matter. The body will weep any way it can. And through the blur, I saw her. The nurse. Dark hair. Kind eyes. One hand on my shoulder, her voice trembling. Not professional, not detached. Human, she knew. And in that knowing, she did the only thing she could. She held my hand. Have you ever died holding the hand of someone who pities you but cannot save you? It is a mercy. It is a cruelty. Minutes passed, or centuries. The pain didn't fade. It sharpened into a point. And just before the monitor flatlined, just before the silence returned, I heard it. A whisper. Not hers, not mine. His. One. Then everything unraveled. Not darkness, not sleep. Just the sensation of a body exhaling its final breath, and still being aware of the air that comes after. I woke up in the hallway, collapsed, on hands and knees, sweating, gasping, alive. Somewhere behind me, the door closed with a soft click. One down, dozens to go. I looked up, in the hallway stretched ahead, infinite as ever. But now a subtle change, a faint pulse in the walls, and at the end, barely visible, stood the man in the white coat. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But I knew this was only the beginning, and I was now both the patient and the punishment. I woke up with the taste of metal still in my mouth, not like blood, more like coins, like I'd been chewing on regret all night. The sheets were twisted, the air stale, my lungs hurt, as if they'd borrowed pain from someone else and forgotten to give it back. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, not moving, just existing. That passive kind of being where you're not alive, just not dead. And then I looked at my hands, not metaphorically, literally. I turned them over, fingers stiff, joints sore, the skin pale, lined, but familiar. Too familiar, like I'd stared at them too long in too many lives. They looked dirty. There was nothing there, no blood, no grime, but they felt stained, somewhere below the skin, a kind of weight that made my wrists ache. I stood, shuffled to the bathroom, and turned on the tap. Warm water, soap, scrub, again, again. The skin turned pink, then red. I didn't stop. It wasn't about germs. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about erasure. But some stains don't lift. They sink. They settle. They name you. That day I didn't go to work. I called in, said I was sick. The nurse on the line sounded half sympathetic, half distracted. I wondered if my voice sounded different to her, if the hallway had changed even that. I wandered the apartment like a ghost. Lights off, curtains closed. The world outside moved on without me. Cars, voices, birds. I couldn't stop thinking about that heart attack, about the name Talbot, about the nurse's hand. The pain hadn't left. Not really. It lived in my memory like a bruise under the skin of thought. I tried to distract myself, read a book, listen to music, made coffee, but everything felt off. Books too loud, music too thin, coffee bitter in a way I couldn't name. So I sat on the floor back against the wall and stared at my hands again, still stained. I thought about the hallway, about the doors, about how many more versions of me waited behind them. I wondered, will each death hurt this much, or will I go numb? Which would be worse? That night I dreamed again, but not of dying. I was in the hospital, the real one, walking the halls, late, lights dimmed, the floors too clean. Every nurse I passed had no face, just blank ovals where features should be. They didn't stop me, didn't speak. I kept walking until I found a sink. It was full of blood, and my hands were already in it. When I woke, I was in the bathroom, fully clothed, hands under the faucet, water running cold. I'd been washing them in my sleep, and still they felt dirty. I returned to work the next day. Couldn't explain why. Maybe because staying home felt worse, like the guilt had more room to stretch its legs there. At the hospital, I moved through the halls like a stranger wearing my own face. Everyone smiled, nodded, some even laughed, but I kept hearing it. The monitor, that slow, mocking beep. Every time I passed an open room, my eyes twitched, expecting to see myself in the bed. I didn't, but the expectation was worse than the sight. I started keeping gloves in my coat pocket, not for protection, for distance. Something about bare skin made me nervous, as if touch itself might betray me, leave a print on a world I no longer trusted to forget. One nurse asked me if I was okay. I told her I was tired. She believed me. That's the danger of working in a place built on fatigue. No one questions it. That evening I stayed late, not working, just walking, up and down halls, into stairwells, sitting in the break room long after everyone else had left. I found myself in front of a storage closet, not special, not marked, but the handle looked familiar. For a moment I thought, what if it opens to the hallway? My hand hovered, but when I opened it, just shelves, boxes, bleach, a mop. I laughed, too loud, too sharp, and walked away before the walls could listen. That night I dreamed of nothing, but when I woke my hands were wet, and the sink was still running. Some doors don't knock, they open on their own. That night I didn't fall asleep, I slipped. One blink, my apartment. The next, I was in a hospital gown 2 sizes too big, standing in a hallway that reeked of latex and loss. This wasn't the long corridor from before, no. This was smaller, narrow, pale blue walls, stickers peeling, a children's wing. I knew it before I saw the bed. The room was quiet, no beeping, no oxygen hiss, just the slow tick of a cartoon-themed clock, shaped like a lion, its plastic tail swinging. I didn't want to look at the bed, but I did, and there I was. Small, maybe 8, maybe 9. Skin pale, lips parted slightly, an IV taped to the back of one thin hand. a stuffed dinosaur tucked under the opposite arm. I felt it before I understood it, my own body shrinking, my height collapsing, limbs thinner, heartbeat faster, panic sharper. I reached for the railing. My hand was a child's. Not metaphorically, I had become the boy. Pain bloomed differently here. Not the roar of cardiac failure or the dull choke of pneumonia. This pain was quiet, subtle. It hid in the joints, behind the eyes, under the tongue. A slow, creeping poison. I couldn't name the disease, but I didn't need to. I could feel it. The nausea that came in waves, the heaviness in the bones, the knowing, before anyone tells you that something's wrong, that you are wrong. The room flickered. A mobile above the bed spun lazily, planets painted in bright colors chipping at the edges. I turned my head, and the movement made everything tilt. A woman sat in the corner, asleep. Her head leaned against the wall, her arms curled around a coat. My mother. I didn't know her name, but I knew the weight of her presence, the way it anchored me, even in this borrowed death. I wanted to cry, not from pain, from the ache of knowing she would wake up, and I wouldn't. Something pressed against my chest, not physically, emotionally. This wasn't just a child dying, it was the idea of a future collapsing. Every one day vanishing into a ceiling tile, every potential becoming nothing more than paperwork. I tried to speak, to say goodbye, to say sorry, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry. My heart was racing now. That panicked rhythm, the body's last stand. I looked at the dinosaur clutched in my arm, faded green, one missing eye, and I realized I had held this toy in a previous life, not metaphorically. I had treated this boy once, briefly, a misdiagnosis, dismissed symptoms as flu, sent him home, told his mother not to worry. 2 weeks later, he was back. Too late, too far gone. Now here I was, in his bed, living the version he never got to escape. The monitor began to beep. Somewhere outside the room, footsteps. My mother stirred, sat up, rubbed her eyes, saw me watching her. Her face lit up for half a second, then dimmed. She knew. She reached for me, voice cracking. "Hey, baby, I'm right here, huh, you okay?" I tried to nod, couldn't. She climbed into the bed beside me, careful not to jostle the wires. She held my hand, his hand, hers. I felt warmth, weight, the terrible, beautiful intimacy of someone loving you while you fade. Tears slid down her cheeks. They landed on my forehead. They burned, not from temperature, from truth. I wanted to scream. I did this, but children don't confess sins. They only feel them. As my breath slowed, the room softened. Light pooled at the edges. My mother's voice blurred. And then, one final exhale. No pain, just absence. The dinosaur slipped from my fingers. The mobile stopped spinning. When I woke, I was curled in a ball on my apartment floor, hands clutching my chest. The carpet smelled of dust and sweat. I couldn't move. For 10 minutes, I lay there listening to nothing. Then I whispered his name. I don't know if I ever knew it, but my mouth formed it. Once, twice, a prayer, a curse. I crawled to the bathroom, washed my face, looked in the mirror. I didn't recognize myself, not because I changed, but because now I saw him in me, and I couldn't stop shaking. It didn't happen all at once. The unraveling, the quiet slipping, the slow undoing of whatever it was that held me together. No, guilt, like rot, doesn't announce itself with a scream. It arrives slowly, patiently. It moves in through the cracks, makes a home beneath your ribs, and waits for you to stop pretending it isn't there. At first, it was small things. I stopped replying to messages. I let calls ring until they gave up. My phone buzzed with lives that hadn't shattered yet, and I couldn't stand the sound of it. Then came the coffee. I stopped making it the way I liked. I let it go cold, drank it anyway. Like I didn't deserve the warmth. like taste was a luxury someone else had earned. I slept less, or rather, I avoided sleep, because I knew what waited there. Every time I closed my eyes, something opened. A room, a door, a memory that wasn't quite mine, but felt too real to deny. And when the nightmares didn't come, the memories did. In the shower, on the subway, at red lights, his name, her breath, the way the stuffed dinosaur slipped from my hand. God, his hand, my hand. I stopped noticing the difference. One morning, I found myself standing outside the hospital 30 minutes before my shift. I didn't remember how I got there. I don't recall dressing or locking the door or crossing the city, but there I was, and I couldn't make my feet go inside. I stood at the curb, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut, open and shut. They sounded like lungs, like some giant body was inhaling everyone who still believed in healing. I didn't feel like a doctor anymore. I felt like a ghost walking among the living. But I went in anyway. What else was I supposed to do? Run? I wouldn't get far. Not from this. So I walked the halls. I checked charts. I nodded at nurses. I answered questions. And the whole time I felt like I was impersonating myself, like the real me had died back there, in one of those rooms. Nights became strange. I started staying at the hospital after my shift ended. I didn't tell anyone, just wandered from floor to floor until the lights dimmed and the noise softened into whispers. There's something sacred about hospitals at 2 a.m. The air goes still. The walls stop pretending to be hopeful. And that's when you see it, the grief in the corners, the shadows that stretch longer than they should. Sometimes I sat in the empty cafeteria watching the soda machine hum. Sometimes I found an unused patient room and lay on the bed, hands folded, eyes open, waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Maybe for sleep to find me. Maybe for a door to open. Maybe for judgment. It got worse. I started hearing things. Not voices, at least not at first, just echoes. A flat line where there was no monitor. The squeak of shoes that never appeared. A soft cough behind a closed door. Once, I passed a room that had been empty for days, under renovation. But when I looked in, it was occupied. By me. Eyes open, silent, still. I didn't stop. I just kept walking. Because if I stopped, if I acknowledged it, I might never move again. At home, things decayed. Food spoiled in the fridge. Mail piled by the door. Mirrors went unclean, as if I didn't want to see myself too clearly. And always, always, my hands. No matter how much I washed, they felt wrong, heavy. I began wearing gloves more often, even indoors, even alone. It didn't help. I dreamt of them, detached, crawling across tile floors like insects. Sometimes I'd wake and find scratches on my arms, fingernail marks, self-inflicted maybe, or maybe not. I stopped trusting the light. In the elevator, in stairwells, in bathrooms. Every flicker felt personal. Like the world was trying to tell me something it didn't have the words for. I started keeping track of the rooms, the ones I'd seen in the hallway. I made a list in a notebook I hid behind my license. I didn't write names, just numbers. 1, 2, 3, the deaths I'd lived, and the blank spaces that followed. Sometimes I stared at the spaces for hours, wondering, who will I be next? And how much of me will come back afterward? Do you know what it feels like to decay in slow motion? To walk around with skin intact while something behind your eyes melts quietly into grief? It feels like breathing underwater. Like every thought is a lungful you're holding in until the next surface. But there's no surface. Not anymore. I tried calling someone. Once. An old friend. Just to say hi, to remember how normal sounded, but when she picked up, I froze. And all I said was, sorry, wrong number. She didn't recognize my voice. Maybe I didn't either. I don't know how long I can keep this up. The pretending, the walking, the waking. There are still so many doors, so many versions of me waiting. some asleep, some broken, some screaming, and all of them deserve to be heard. Tonight, I feel it again. The pull, the soft hum beneath the floor. Another death waits, another me, another ending. And I'm too tired to resist. There comes a point when the fear of what's ahead becomes quieter than the dread of staying the same. I had reached it, not with clarity, not with grace, just exhaustion. That soft collapse of resistance when your bones stop pretending they can carry your secrets any longer. I hadn't slept in 2 days, not truly. What little rest I found was stolen in 10-minute intervals, head slumped against a wall, or chest rising and falling on an empty gurney in some forgotten hallway. And when the hallway came again, the other hallway, I didn't resist. I welcomed it. Like a man sinking back into a bad habit, just to feel something familiar. But this time it didn't start with a door. It started with him, the man in the white coat, standing at the end of the corridor, waiting, not watching, not pacing, just still. I walked toward him, my footsteps echoing with the rhythm of a question I didn't know how to ask. And when I stopped just short of him, arms heavy, throat dry, he spoke, not with volume, with precision. "You're tired." I nodded, "And now you want out." Another nod. He tilted his head slightly, not mockery, not sympathy, just curiosity, like he was studying a decision already made. "There's a way," he said, "but you already know the price." My voice came out rough. "What price?" He didn't blink. "Truth." I waited for more. A list, a condition, a loophole, but he didn't give me one. Just that single word, hung in the air like a sentence with no punctuation. "Truth." I took a step back. The floor felt softer there. Or maybe my knees were giving out. "What if I can't?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You can. You won't." He turned then, walked a few steps, and beside him, as if conjured by his movement, a door appeared. This one wasn't like the others. Not a hospital room, not a death chamber. A plain wooden door, worn, familiar, and written across it, in the soft, looping cursive of regret, was my name. Matthew. No title, no patient number. Just me. He placed a hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn it. "Behind this," he said, "is your way out, but only if you tell them." I stared. "Tell who?" He looked at me, and in that moment, his face flickered. Not changed, revealed. It was every patient I had failed, every eye I couldn't meet, every heartbeat I let slow without reason. And then it was me, older, tired, unforgiven. "Tell them," he whispered, "the ones still living, the ones you lied to, the ones who deserve the truth you buried beneath your ambition." I wanted to say no, not because I thought he was wrong, but because I knew he was right. And admitting that was the hardest death of all. I stepped forward. The door didn't open. It dissolved. And behind it, a hospital boardroom, a hearing, faces I knew, colleagues, administrators, lawyers, a microphone, a recorder, and a chair empty, waiting for me. I turned to him one last time. "What happens if I do?" He didn't answer. He simply stepped, and I walked through, not because I was brave, not because I wanted redemption, but because I was done dying quietly. They say when you confess something terrible, you feel lighter. They lie. I didn't feel lighter. I felt cracked open, like something inside me had been scooped out, still raw, still twitching, left exposed under the hospital's fluorescent lights. The room was colder than it needed to be, or maybe that was just me. Maybe guilt lives in the skin once it's said out loud. I sat in the chair they gave me, not restrained, but no part of me could move. There were 8 people at the table, 3 doctors, 2 administrators, a lawyer, a woman I didn't know, and a recorder in the center, blinking its little red eye at me like it already knew what I'd done. I looked down at my hands. No gloves this time. They felt heavier than ever. The lawyer cleared his throat. Dr. Matthew Kane, do you understand the purpose of this hearing? I nodded. Please speak clearly for the record. Yes. Would you like to make a statement before we proceed? I paused, a long, cold breath. Yes, I would. I didn't read from paper, didn't bring notes, because what I had to say couldn't be written cleanly. It had to be spoken the way it had lived inside me. Jagged, slow, ugly. I changed the diagnosis of a patient, I began. Silence. No gasps, no movement. Just listening. I looked at the woman on the end of the table. She didn't blink. Her name was Ellen Green Abessarian, I continued. She had pneumonia, treatable. She could have recovered, but I made it look like cancer. Late stage, non-curable. My voice cracked. No one offered me water. I did it because her daughter offered me money. A lot of money. She believed her mother was suffering, and she wanted peace, comfort. She trusted me to do the right thing, and I took that trust and I bent it. A sharp breath, inhale, exhale. I took the money, I changed the chart, I gave up on someone who wasn't done yet. There it was, the whole thing, laid bare. One of the doctors leaned back. The leather of his chair creaked, like even it was uncomfortable now. I kept speaking. She died 3 weeks later. I told myself it was natural, that maybe the lie helped. But the truth is, I killed her. Not with a scalpel, not with poison, but with silence, with paperwork, with cowardice. I finally looked up. Eyes met mine, some narrowed, some softened. One closed slowly as if trying to shut out the room entirely. I continued. She wasn't the only one. I've made mistakes. I've signed charts I didn't double check. I've made calls based on convenience. I've sent people home who should have stayed. I've let outcomes happen when I knew they could have been changed. No one spoke. The silence became a second audience. I can't undo any of it, I said, but I won't pretend it didn't happen anymore. I won't carry it in the dark where no one sees. If I'm going to live with it, really live with it, then the world has to know it's there. And then I stopped. Not because I was finished, but because I had nothing left to give. There was a long pause, then the lawyer leaned forward. Do you understand the consequences of your admission, Durkane? Yes. Are you willing to accept them? Another breath. I already have. When I walked out of that room, it wasn't over. Not legally, not professionally, but something had shifted. The hallway was brighter, not safe, not gentle, but no longer hiding from me. I walked past a window. The sky was gray, rain coming. Not like the first time, not the storm, just rain. And for once, it didn't feel like a warning, just weather. I stood there for a long time, letting the weight settle, not to be rid of it, but to carry it honestly. They didn't say the word guilty. This wasn't a courtroom. There was no gavel, no jury, no dramatic pause before the sentence. Just a folded sheet of paper, slid across a polished table, a single line bolded near the bottom. License revoked, effective immediately, no handcuffs, no reporters, no headlines, just silence, and a signature that looked a lot like mine. I walked out of the building with empty hands, no badge, no white coat, no stethoscope swinging against my chest. For the first time in years, I felt civilian, no longer cloaked in authority, just a man who used to be a doctor. I didn't go home. Home had too many mirrors, too many toothbrushes, too many reminders of a life lived without consequence. Instead, I walked, nowhere in particular, past bus stops and corner cafes, past people who didn't know my name. The world hadn't changed. I had. I was no longer someone who might be caught. I was someone who had been. And strange as it sounds, there was peace in that. Not relief, not redemption, but stillness. The kind that comes after you finally stop running. At a crosswalk, I saw a child holding her mother's hand. Tiny sneakers, a lunchbox shaped like a whale. She looked up and smiled at something the mother whispered. I almost smiled too, then remembered. The boy, the dinosaur. I looked away. Days passed like that, slow, colorless. I stayed in motion as if that could delay the next dream. But the hallway never came. Not that week, not the next. And in its absence, I felt something strange. I missed it. Not the deaths, not the pain, but the certainty, the weight of knowing what came next. Now, the silence was unpredictable. What would it do with me now that I'd spoken? Was this grace or simply intermission? One evening, I returned to the hospital, not to work, just to sit in the waiting room among strangers. No one recognized me. Good. That was part of the sentence. A man coughed softly beside me. His wife squeezed his hand. I kept my distance, like I didn't want to infect the air with my past. After a while, I stood, wandered the halls. Everything looked the same. Sterile, lit, quiet. But I knew better now. Hospitals are full of ghosts. Not all of them dead. Before I left, I stopped outside the ICU. One of the nurses passed me, paused. Duquesne? I turned. She hesitated. I heard about everything. I nodded, ready for the rest. But all she said was, thank you for telling the truth. Then she walked away. I stood there for a long time, staring at the double doors, remembering the first lie, the first envelope, and the woman I failed. I never saw her daughter again. She didn't come to the hearing. Part of me had hoped she would, not to forgive me, just to look me in the eye, to confirm I was real. But maybe some truths are too cruel to witness twice. Maybe silence is her sentence, as this is mine. The hallway returned without warning. No blink, no fall, just me, standing in it again. But this time I knew. There were no more doors, just one, at the very end. The lights above me flickered, not in menace, but like candles in wind, faint, tired. I walked slowly. Each step felt like a page turning. No more second chances, no more lessons dressed as pain, just the end. The last door was different, not in shape or color, but in presence. It knew I was coming. It waited. I reached for the handle. My hand didn't tremble. That surprised me. I had trembled for less. But not now. Now I was ready. The room was dim, a bed, a monitor, a man, me. Not a version, not a shadow, just me. Older, thinner, quiet, eyes closed, chest rising slow, but not unconscious. He opened his eyes, met mine, and in that look, no fear, no blame, no plea, just knowing. The kind of knowing that only comes when the story has nothing left to hide. I stepped closer, sat beside him. There were no machines save the monitor. Its beep soft, measured, a rhythm I'd learned too well. He smiled, a small, tired thing. I forgive you, he whispered. No more words, just that, 3 syllables. And then, a long, slow breath, one last rise of the chest, and silence. The monitor stilled. Flatline, but not screaming, just quiet. I sat there long after the sound had gone, hand resting over his, my hand. I didn't cry. There were no tears left, only stillness, and a strange peace, not joy, not release, but peace, like the world had exhaled something it had been holding. The room faded, not like before, no sudden pull. It faded the way dust does, soft edges, no announcements. And when it was gone, I wasn't in the hallway, I wasn't in my apartment. I was nowhere and everywhere. It's raining tonight, not the kind that screams against the windows. No thunder, no fury, just that quiet kind of rain, the kind that stays, the kind that soaks everything without asking. I'm not in the hospital. I'm not in the hallway. I'm not in any room at all, but I'm still here, somewhere between memory and mercy. And I think that's enough. People think redemption is loud, a speech, a gesture, a miracle. But sometimes it's just a moment when the running stops, when a man sits in the rain and no longer tries to explain why he did what he did. He just lets it fall, lets it wash through him, and doesn't pretend it cleans anything. I've learned this. The truth doesn't set you free. It holds you accountable. And that, in its own way, is freedom. Not the kind that lets you forget, but the kind that lets you carry it openly, without hiding, without bleeding on people who didn't cut you. If you're still listening, if you made it all the way to this final breath of mine, then maybe some part of you needed to hear it. Not because you've done what I've done, but because maybe you stood at your own version of that desk, with your own envelope, and a decision so small, so quiet, that no one would have noticed, except you, and maybe the rain. So here's what I'll leave you with. The world won't always know what you chose, but you will. And that knowing, it never leaves. You can run from it, hide it, drown it in noise, in work, in sleep. But it will find you in a hallway, in a mirror, in a child's eyes, in the shape of your own hands under a faucet at 3 a.m. Choose carefully, because money fades and applause always dies down. But a life once taken, even in silence, even with paperwork, you carry it forever, not as a burden, not as punishment, but as proof that you were given the power to do good and you made a choice. So make a better one than I did, please. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll stay here a little while longer. Just me and the rain. But is that truly the whole story? Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.